Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Ask Me Anything event on organizational, district, and policy views on AI in education. I'm Kelly McNeil, Senior Learning Experience Designer, joined by my amazing team behind the scenes supporting the HP and Digital Promise powered community, the AI Education Exchange, Jasmine, Nick, and Rebecca. These interactive Q&A format sessions give you the opportunity to meet and hear from an amazing lineup of prominent experts in the AI and education field. Today's questions have been sourced from our education community who submitted their questions through our LinkedIn community and the AI Education Exchange. Digital Promise is a global nonprofit working to expand opportunity for every learner, working with a wide range of partners and practitioners in the US and around the world. Our initiatives have impacted over 4.4 million students and 180,000 teachers across 173 districts and in 27 countries to date. Our vision for artificial intelligence in education puts people first. We envision safe, equitable, and meaningful AI in education using emerging technologies to improve education by enhancing how we teach and learn. It is my honor and privilege to introduce to you the President and CEO of Digital Promise for today's conversation, Jean-Claude Brizard.
Hi, Kelly. So happy and so great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming. We are very excited to hear from you. But so before we get started, why don't you just introduce yourself and tell us a little more about you?
Kelly, I've been in education in the U.S. of a very long time. I'm almost afraid to say how long. I was a teacher of physics and chemistry, high school principal. I led the high school division in New York City. Former superintendent. I was a founder of the Gates Foundation, doing wonderful work. Worked for the College Board for a while, so I've been around. Which is why I say, ask me anything about everything.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, we are so glad that you are here, and we can't wait to ask you all of these things about AI. So, where we want to start, I guess, for our audience is kind of to talk a little bit about where we are in education. Again, you mentioned, your vast experience across wearing many hats. You've been education, organization. So, want to kind of think about this broadly about where we are and where we are going. So, our first question that comes in is what effects do you think AI is currently having on the educational landscape in both or in all organizational, district, and school levels? And where do you see the future of this going?
Yeah, so I think there's been quite the hype around AI in education. Um, some of it warranted, some of it not, frankly. Gosh, so many things to talk about when to your question. You have classroom educators who are both excited and worried about what this means.
Mhm.
You got a lot of young people who are excited about what this means. I have 4 kids, 3 teenage boys, well, 2 teenage boys. One is only 9 years old, and they all know exactly what AI is.
Of
And I
course.
think, particularly as adults, we are way too slow in embracing the technology. You've got system leaders who are wondering what this means for the work that they actually need to do. And you've got policymakers, frankly, who, yes, are worried about guardrails or worried about safety, etc. But at the same time, I think this is a tool that can be leveraged in terms of really closing some of the challenges that we've had in education if used appropriately. I'm already seeing mistakes being made by some. I'm already seeing decisions being made that frankly are worrying. But at the same time, I don't think we're really thinking about the potential here for really transforming what we've been struggling with for so many decades.
Yeah, so I'd love to hear more about that. I know I've had a
Yeah.
chance to talk to you a little bit about that, and you get very excited about what you think the real potential is for teaching and learning with AI. So can you expand on that a little bit? Tell us what you think that potential is.
Kelly, let me start perhaps going back to not just AI, but technology in itself, right? When I taught physics in New York City, I discovered the Vernier software suite. Tufts University was designing this new set of curricula around physics teaching, and it transformed, frankly, what I did in the classroom. And my kids moved to nearly a 90 to 100% passing rate on the New York State exam
Wow.
in physics. And what we did very simply was flip the cookbook lab. So if you think about your days in high school, or even college for that matter, where you did this experiments in chemistry or physics and you follow the procedure, right? And at the end of the experiment, you have no idea what you did. You may have had, I don't know, 0.2% deviation from the norm, and I have no clue what you're talking about. What I discovered in that classroom was a way of flipping the whole way in which we did experiment. For example, the experiment lasted 90 seconds or even a minute. And then the discussions and discovery and debate went on for 20 minutes or half an hour. So it's complete reversal. And all of a sudden, the conceptual understanding of the science became real. And all it took was, Mackie 2s at interface and probes, right? You can change that. Fast forward to AI, you think about, frankly, what that has the potential to do. And I can give you a bunch of examples, but let me use one that maybe some of us in the audience may actually remember. If you remember the Magic School Bus, and how it took kids to the place. So when I taught earth science in middle school and talked about plate tectonics, I had these like 11, 12-year-olds, and I'm like taking place in my hand and rubbing and showing them. And, like it didn't spark the imagination for a bunch of Brooklyn kids, right? But imagine taking a bunch of kids to the St. Andreas Fault. Let's go take a look. Let's go visit. And you can see an amazing generative conversation or Gen AI, push discussion about what actually feels and looks like. So that potential in transforming science education, that potential effectively in even transforming how we teach social studies or ELA or mathematics is there. I had a quick talk with Peggy Brookings from the National Board, who gave me a copy of a lesson plan she had used to renew her certification as a National Board Certified Teacher, and all leveraging AI with origami and mathematics instruction through a simulation. So it is so much potential there, and really bringing, especially for poor kids who don't have access to go to those places, to visit the Louvre, to visit certain places and see. I think we have a potential here to really close so many of the gaps that we experience, and we can talk more about that as we keep going.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I'm just excited about the idea of Mrs. Frizzle, right? Mrs. Frizzle is going to take us on a
Yes.
journey on the Magic
Yes.
School Bus with AI. So that's going to be the subtitle for this talk is the Magic School Bus journey. Excellent. So next, I want to talk a little more about your experience as a leader. You have unique perspectives as a leader and things that you have to consider when you're approaching AI. So, want to kind of dig into that. First of all, what are important things to consider as we're a fairly large organization. There are certainly organizations much larger than us. There are organizations even smaller than us, and we also have one that just came in from the audience. I'll ask that one in just a second. So, but what are things that you consider as a leader in regards to AI use, and policy within your own organization that you're leading? We'll start there.
Kelly, I've got a bunch of layers. So I can think about this from the perspective of a school principal, or for that matter, a school superintendent. And I've led, again, large city school systems and mid-sized city school systems. I can tell you that as a principal, I wanted to make sure my teachers had the tools they needed to really be effective in serving the young people in front of them. And the question is, what are those tools? When I think about I want to make sure that my district or the system or whatever is being generated by orgs like Digital Promise or others like, ISTE and company that really provides the information and the wherewithal to understand how this is actually being used. You think of yourself as a principal teacher, and the fact is that, I was told a long time ago, it's about the teachers. You take care of the teachers that take care of your kids, to make sure that they have the tools. That for me was really, really important. And as a principal, it's the policy coming out of the district to make sure that I again have the autonomy and the knowledge and the resources. At the same time, I also want my system to make sure that the imagination of what's possible here is important, and at the same time protect my young people, right? Protect the people who are protecting the young people. That's really critical as you sit in that middle layer as a school principal. As a district superintendent, I live quite a bit at both the practice and policy level. I would ask teachers as I visited classrooms, tell me what I can do to make your life easier. And what that meant, frankly, was make sure the professional learning around something like artificial intelligence is there. I have visited classrooms, I've seen teachers who are excited about AI, who are doing work on AI, and I asked them, where'd you get your training? And they said, I self-taught. I went out and looked for it. That should not be.
Mhm.
I mean, teachers
Mhm.
do that. Let's let's
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
let's understand that.
Mhm.
At the same time, if you think about the whole concept of putting knowledge in the hands of teachers, what am I doing as a district to make sure that I am providing both the guardrails and the support and the protection and the excitement that comes with technological tools into the hands of the folks who are teaching my young people? Um, what's really, really important too, which I don't think enough people are talking about, AI, for the most part, is going to show up in ed tech tools in classrooms and in schools. And most districts do not have a cogent ed tech strategy. We spent $87 billion in America on ed tech tools. Yet, if you ask the average district, what is your ed tech strategy vis-a-vis teaching and learning, vis-a-vis the gaps that you see, vis-a-vis the people in front of you that you are educating, very often you don't get a cogent explanation. I'll give you one last layer, and this showed up in the National EdTech Plan, and because a number of us pushed it, and it's been the topic of conversation with leaders, the CEOs of ISTE, COSIN, CEDA, Digital Promise, etc. We've been begging and pushing on both the state level leadership and district level leadership. Please make sure your chief academic officer and your chief information officer are, or even your chief technology officer, are in the same room and planning together. Too often we see, for example, the library services buying a product like BrainPop, yet the academic officer doesn't know what that does and what it's doing in the classroom. So when you have that kind of coordinated, coherent effort on an instructional program, and the technology is a tool to either accelerate and support, then you have a really cogent strategy, then the AI makes sense in supporting whether you have a child who has an IEP or is a multilingual learner, etc. All of it shows up in the way that is coherent. That is, to me, is the ultimate solution that leaders can provide to the folks in front of their children.
That's wonderful. I appreciate your perspectives of all those layers. It's a lot of things to consider for sure. But that's great. And I just loved your story of you as a superintendent visiting your teacher's classroom. So I think that that's a wonderful thing, and so glad that you do that. And I imagine you still probably get a chance to visit
Oh, I
with
try to tell
teachers.
Kelly. I used to ask teachers, especially in science classrooms, can I be a guest teacher in your classroom? I did that once in Chicago, and I taught the solar system using the iPad. And my communications team brought every newspaper and TV cameras in the room. I did not know that was going to happen. It was a terrifying experience. You talk about being observed.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is that more terrifying than an observation? Yeah, it
Oh,
sounds
no, it
like
was
it. Sounds
it was
like
the
it.
ultimate observation, but it was thank God the next day the papers had a good story to tell. But
Yeah,
yeah, it's
for sure.
scary.
I bet. Well, I'm really glad that you started out your observation from the perspective of a principal, and we actually, while you were talking, got a question from our live audience who is a principal. And his question is, how can school principals maximize AI for administrative and evaluation tasks?
I would just say to the question, one, there are tools being developed. I know some folks are developing their own, but I do know, for example, ZUM, the company with transportation, one of our partners here at Digital Promise, is really looking to bring efficacy and efficiency to yellow bus transportation. There are folks who are working on this. The one thing I would urge as anyone seek to look for tools and solutions to support these kinds of things is to look at what is being certified by organizations like Digital Promise, ISTE, COSIN, because we don't go through a process of making sure that what is being developed is safe and effective. It is a good way of filtering through. The EdSearch Product Index is a good one to lean on. The second thing I would say is to make sure that whatever tools is being used or developed to keep the human in the center. Because
Yes.
human judgment is really important to know when the machine is not doing something right, to have the world to say, this doesn't make any sense. When I see um, it could be as simple as, again, these kinds of administrative tasks, or folks looking at AI now grading student work. When that is being outsourced to the machine completely, I worry a ton about that, because then you lose the human in the middle, the human in the center, making sure you're evaluating what's coming on the other end, because we all know these tools can hallucinate and give you faulty information. So that, I would argue, is an important one. If I can put a final point on that, I mean, Kelly, I think many of you guys know I'm a commercial pilot, and story I tell the people is that when Boeing removed the human in the loop with the Max 8, look at the result. We had 3 crashes in succession. You got to keep the human in the loop. Human ingenuity is important here as we think about the role of emerging technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. Very important. I think those are all great points, and I'm sure our audience was delighted to hear about your pilot story too. So, um, speaking of, just again, we're going to step back into some of the like the leader role that you have, and speaking from this like organizational perspective, how do you design guidelines and messaging for a large organization such as Digital Promise while AI is rapidly evolving daily? And I think this sort of like applies to, in the sense of a district or a school or even a classroom. How do we create guidelines that take that into consideration, that what is happening today might change tomorrow, and the next day and the next day.
Kelly, I think the solution ultimately is not to be a slave to the way in which the technology is evolving, right? To make sure that you try to leapfrog. And there are ways of doing that. As it was one example, we support districts in this whole concept of computational thinking pathways. When you look at the competencies in that, and we have teams here who are integrating that in the core curricula, um, it transcends technology, because all of it will be using algorithms. All of them use pattern. So when you think about, again, the idea of debugging, for example, is an important skill to really, for young people, frankly, for adults who actually have. So that is one way. The other, frankly, is to help people not get stuck in magical thinking, which is one of our teammates, Jeremy Rochelle, loves to talk about. Right? Get away from the magical thinking and think about, thinking, what does this mean ultimately to teaching and learning? But in the messaging, it's why when you look at our website, you see our vision around AI. We don't talk about the latest iteration of ChatGPT or the latest iteration, of Gemini. We think about what is emerging technology's role in supporting the foundations of teaching and learning. We talk a lot about the idea of learner variability, that every single person has a jagged learner profile. How do you get personal? How do you really understand the learning science and what it means? And then thirdly, frankly, one thing we message quite a bit is this idea of the golden triangle. And that's how we actually work. What that means simply is that you bring the learning scientist, you bring the developer, and you bring the practitioner in the same room, and they iterate. And the professional learning, the process of iterating on a product, helps the practitioner and the developer understand each other's work really, really well. And you get to a place where it's not a matter of, is it GPT-4 or 5, whatever it may be, right? But what is the underlying technology behind this particular product or this particular work, and what does it mean to what I do every single day in supporting the learners in front of me? If we keep focusing on that foundation, that's really critical and important. If I add one more layer, because I like to look around the corner and think around the corner. By the way, the analogy there to aviation was me getting my instrument rating, and I thought I had nothing to do. I was like happy-go-lucky, watching the clouds, etc. And my instructor began to yell at me, and I said, "What did I do?" He goes, "The moment you think you have nothing to do, the sequence of events will crash starts." He goes, "Always be 5 to 10 minutes ahead of the airplane. The faster the airplane, the more ahead you have to be. And with AI, we got to be on the curve." And what I mean by that very simply is that when you think about what we have been struggling with in education, and the question, how to actually close gaps. So one example there for me, which again looks around the corner, is the whole concept of assessment. Assessment is a thing, it's an event, it's a place. You have kids go sit for 3 hours and take a test. You close schools for a week and have kids take tests, right? That is asinine. And when you think about even the move to formative assessments, even there, you're taking time away from instruction to quiz and test kids. When you think about AI's potential in moving assessment to pedagogy, to the activity, having it embedded in the activity, the closest example is the running record. There you really are leaning on the data coming out of learning science or what is happening between teachers, students, and content, or families as well. And then that drives intervention. It drives what we do. I think emerging technologies has the potential here to really redefine how we think about assessment in the near future.
Oh, I think that's great. I really think it's profound too, just talking about, I'm from Digital Promise, so I understand our research practitioner industry partnerships that we work with. But I think it's really powerful. And what you said about technology, not being a slave to technology, and how to prepare for that. And you keep teeing things up for the questions that are coming in from the audience. So you mentioned, looking around the corner, and we got a wonderful question from the founder of allyed.org. If everything goes well in your mind, how do you envision AI will engage learners in another 1 to 2 years? And can you paint a picture of where we are going from an optimistic stance?
Let me just say from the founder of Allied is that I tend to be very optimistic. The Gates Foundation has a motto of being impatient optimist, and that is me to the core. Yes, we have to worry about safety. Yes, we have to worry about guardrails. All of that notwithstanding, I think the potential here is massive as long as our imagination continues. So 1 to 2 years, let me just argue things already are happening. What I hope happens in 1 to 2 years is the beginning of a redefinition of how we design curriculum. Let me give you one. I'm doing a big keynote presentation in Pennsylvania at Hershey for Pennsylvania tech teachers, right? And part of my presentation is going to demonstrate a project currently in play at Arizona State University that could easily be brought to K-12. And what they're looking to do is sort of help people really understand American history. And the example I'm going to use goes back to the Revolutionary War. When you think about that, who do you think about? You think about old men who could afford to have their pictures painted, right? The portraits painted like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. Yet the real heroes of the war, the Revolutionary War, were average Americans who took their muskets and went to battle to free our country. So is there a way for Gen AI to really demonstrate and bring to life those people, those average Americans, right, who are the ones fighting and tell their story? You could change the way we teach history by really going in to see what is happening in a way that perhaps we've not done before. For me, that is an amazing thing we can do tomorrow. How do we move young people from the procedural understanding of mathematics to a more conceptual understanding of mathematics? It goes back to my experience in the physics lab, right? Of really getting kids on inquiry to ask questions and wonder. Colleague, one of our colleagues, Kelly, talked about, how do you light the fire in young people's mind to question and quiz, right? That I think has a real potential in the next 1 to 2 years. But perhaps within that framework, and maybe even further, I think about the whole concept of personalization, right? This is a concept we've been talking about for years, yet no one really knows what that means. And but at Digital Promise, we do. We have a whole project here called the Learner Variability Navigator. And what it does is it helps us really understand what we're personalizing and why we are personalizing it, right? You think about, for example, what Todd Rose talked about in his book, The End of Average, that there is no such thing as the average student. So how do we actually get personal? How do we really understand the learner variable needs, the neurodiverse needs of every single student? I think AI can help us really get personal, can help us also rethink the mental model for teaching to really understand how we address the individual needs of each and every student. That I think within 2 to 5 years, we can actually get there.
Yeah, I think that's a really great optimistic stance for sure. And I appreciate you bringing up personalization because I think that's been a sort of kind of hot topic and sort of hotly contested and debated among the AI and education folks. So I appreciate that perspective, as well as the call out for Digital Promises Learning Variability Navigator, which has existed, as we know, before AI. And so it is a wonderful resource and tool that is out there to explore that. Okay. So I am excited by all of the different questions that keep coming in, and like the variety of our audience. As you've worn many hats, it looks like our audience has worn a lot of hats. And so we actually have a question now from a technology vendor. So this one is going to be interesting. It says, from all your experience across so many perspectives in the education sector, what reflections do you have about how technology vendors could do a better job of supporting educators and students? What advice would you offer to AI technology vendors looking to support the education sector?
It's a fantastic question, and yes, I've advised at the companies right now. I'm an advisor to the Lego Group with BrainPop. I do a lot of lots of discussions and what we call sparring with the team at BrainPop. Um, and so the one thing I'll push is that what you see ASU GSV striving to get to is something that has been deliberate. I was, I believe, at the second ASU GSV in Arizona so many years ago, and there were investors and tech vendors in the room, scant few educators. And our discussion with Deborah Quazzo and others was that you have to have the purchasers in the room to really understand. So then, what I would argue very simply, Kelly, to the question is that too often we find tech developers who are building products without necessarily engaging the people who are using it. That feedback loop, that partnership, to your point, the industry, technologist, practitioner partnership is critical. So I would argue with any tech developer, find a way to create a kind of feedback loop that's where you're building, it comes from an organic understanding of what is needed in the classroom, right? Then your impact is going to be multiplied so much broader and greater, because again, you have that kind of iteration. Again, what maybe this is might be slightly beyond the scope. One thing that we just launched, thanks to the Institute for Education Sciences (IES), with Amera Learning, 6 school districts, MDRC, Penn GSE, and our scientists here, is an integration of AI into science and reading. It's an iterative, what I call the golden triangle effort, in really moving that conversation. So, but there are more simple ways of doing that. And it is frankly making sure, if you don't have that kind of network like Digital Promises, or PIP, right? Which it's a bad name, but it describes the partnership between industry and practitioners. If you have folks who are buying your product, create some mechanism, hopefully facilitated by a third party. But if not, create a mechanism for the feedback loop. So you're making sure you understand, am I serving the needs of my people? Not just the subscription rate, not just the renewal rate. Those are good indicators. But again, making sure that the nuanced pieces you're getting from your teachers is part of your conversation. Otherwise, you're going to be going off and building your next tech product and not really having it baked in what young people need in the classroom.
Yeah, very well said. I was in the classroom, and I can attest the conversations I've had with my colleagues, about who built this. Like, clearly, they're not a teacher.
Yes, exactly,
Clearly, they
exactly,
didn't understand what a classroom is like. But
exactly.
no, so that was a fantastic question from the audience. Um, One more question that we're going to go in the section of AI as a leader, and then we're going to move into sort of some like usage and practical applications. But this one is around some of the like safety and concerns. So this one is about district and district leaders. What steps can districts and leaders take to build trust with families and communities regarding AI tools and data privacy?
Yeah, so I think an easy way to do that is to make sure whatever is being purchased is certified by, again, as such product index is a good place to start, because all of us are nonprofits who do certifications in ed tech. We tend to put stuff within the as such product index. We're in the middle of creating a version 2.0 of that. We have a coalition, again, that's ISTE, COSIN, CEDA, CAST, all these sort of alphabet
All the
soups.
all the acronyms.
Uh, yes, but it covers the spectrum of CAS serving special needs kids, etc., to make sure that we're putting our certification, our acorn, frankly, on these products. So get one of those, and that demonstrates that you care. We have one on AI coming out very, very soon, a digital promise. That's a way of messaging to your community that we care. The research-based design that we have here, Digital Promise, is an amazing certification because it demonstrates that what you're building is baked in the science. So that's an easy way to actually get started. And if you are a district, I would say that's the way you educate your teachers, your principals, your community, that we do not buy anything unless it's been vetted by some of these third-party consumer report like organizations to make sure it is good. And we do talk to Common Sense Media. We talk to a bunch of other folks who are the work that we actually do. So that is an easy entry. And by the way, the certification the lift is so low. And by the lift, but the amount of money is so low. I believe it's like $250 to get certified. It's only good though for a short amount of time, 2 years. So you have to get renewed. We do know products evolve and change, which is why there is a time limit on it. But it's good to have it. That's an amazing way of messaging to your community.
Yeah, fantastic. No, I think that's great advice. Okay, so we are going to shift over now to some of the AI usage and practical applications for schools and teachers. Earlier, you talked a little bit about personalization and student assessment. So we're going to kind of talk about policy and some of the safety sorts of things. What role should policy play in regulating the use of AI for student assessment and learning personalization?
Yeah, I think the US DOE in the last administration came up with a really bunch of really great documents that provide a kind of guardrails and support. And we were partners in developing that work. So there's one for higher ed, one for K-12. Our team helped develop an acceptable use policy on AI in schools. By the way we worked, it was done by our team here in collaboration with 10 school districts. So it is not something that our team went to a corner and wrote a policy, but they did so with a bunch of school systems. So there's a lot of good guidance out there. But ultimately, what I would argue is, and it's something we have not leveraged enough as a community, the purchasers, the procurement process is a powerful tool to signal to to developers, to suppliers that we care about safety, we care about student privacy. So you can have whatever you want, but if they know you care about it, they're going to make sure they actually do it. And I think, frankly, if you have enough states or school districts who, in their procurement process, demand certain things within the process, the folks who are selling are going to align accordingly. If we don't do that in our school systems, and there is no incentive for unless the hearts are in the right place, right? There is no incentive for these suppliers to behave accordingly. So I would argue, if you're a school system, you have purchasing power here. Again, 87 billion in the US alone. And by the way, these are even this year, maybe previous year's numbers. We have a power here to make things happen in the sector.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so you've kind of answered this already a little bit, but I want you to dig a little bit deeper into this one, because we haven't talked a whole lot about ethics. So we're going to bring up ethics a little bit. I think the certifications are great, but and you've talked about humans in the loop, which I think also pertains to this. But how do leaders, or how should leaders evaluate the effectiveness and ethical implications of AI tools before approving them for classroom use?
Yeah, so two slightly separate conversations, Kelly. One, let me start with the effectiveness piece. Um, we seldom ask that question of EdTech products, right? AI or no AI, right? By the way, everything is going to have AI. It's a matter of time, right? We'll have AI inside of it. Um, one of the questions we can easily ask of in the procurement process, can you demonstrate that this thing does what it claims to do, right? We don't ask that question. We did a quick landscape. We'll have to do a much more in-depth landscape here very, very soon. We did one last year, and we found 87 places asking for product certification. Most of it came from Utah. One state was where we found the most demand And Sidney Dixon, who's the state chief there, is adamant and wondered about pushing these kinds of questions. But the whole efficacy piece is difficult because, we have a few organizations who are working on rapid cycle efficacy work. You know, some are doing it in the US, some are part of a global network. I think some countries are putting filters. We cannot sell to a school system, a public school system, unless you've gone through some efficacy study. We got to get better in the research to go faster, and we're trying to get there. At the same time, you can, through your data analytics with your school system where you already are selling, demonstrate level of efficacy. And again, going back to the purchasers, you can ask the question. Or, frankly, you take a look at what our team is working on with the Southern Education Foundation, where there's an agreed upon set of metrics with the supplier, the school system, right? To say that we're going to buy, we're going to get half the money upfront, but when you see the efficacy within that time frame, or you don't get the rest of the money. So, that kind of procurement effort being pushed by the Southern Education Foundation, I believe funded by the Gates Foundation, is an amazing way of looking at ways of pushing on efficacy. That really is a critical piece. If you're looking to serve multilingual learners, how do you know it's working? All good questions. You can have that kind of agreed upon work. The one on ethics is important, and it goes back to this idea of buying from reputable organizations and companies, right? But to that end, you got to make sure there's a filtering process of that kind. And again, I keep going back to certification. That's an amazing way of making sure that the team itself has a track record of being ethical in what they actually are doing. But when you think about this idea of safety and privacy, and making sure that the edtech company product do care about selling something they know is going to be what efficacious, what is going to be protecting student privacy, that's really important. There's one last thing I would push, which is really, I think, is critically important. Many school districts have edtech products with AI showing up in so many different ways. It's being brought in by the kids, by teachers, and that kind of protection and filter is something we have to put in play to make sure that what is showing up in the classroom has gone to that kind of level of, again, ethical consideration, to make sure. And now that the guardrails are being pulled, I know this administration just removed the executive order on AI. That makes me nervous in the sense that want to make sure that we are protecting our young people. So it is what it is. So, but this is where the procurement can push in demanding that these products, frankly, have some level of demonstrable ethical considerations. Otherwise, again, you're going to have tools showing up in our classroom that may not have that kind of filter.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, when you mentioned the work that had been done, and I was thinking to myself that is now where is it? But the work was done. And so those
Yeah,
documents exist. They're not gone.
yeah,
We can be responsible. We can use them. And to your point, procurement, I hope will be. I hope are watching and listening and thinking about that and will be using them. Um,
exactly.
Okay, so we're getting a little bit close here to the end. Just a few more questions left. I want to ask you some advice questions, but before I get to that one other question that came in around getting started um, with like how to do this. So how do district or organizational leaders or even classroom teachers, or principals, how do they get started learning about AI in a capacity to be able to help guide others? And are there any resources that you recommend?
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, our landing page on AI Digital Promise is a good place to start. It's chock full of information about exactly this question. And again, our partnership with the Department of Education is there. Our partnership with other organizations is there. Our partnership with Google, for example, is there. Our partnership with funders like the Gates Foundation, a lot of it is there. These documents, again, because we're a nonprofit, are free for the public to actually use. So please go ahead and use that. I would argue there's so many discussions and conversations happening on AI in education. Find a reputable one and engage. We're having one in Anaheim, California, that last year drew 800 educators. It's a no hubris, hands-on, come play. But I would also argue for system leaders, there's enough happening from ASA to council great city schools, and now there's frankly where you can engage in those conversations. But if you're a classroom teacher and you don't have the resources to go to a conference like that, play. Ask your principal, can we play with this? Again, low stakes, not yet in the classroom. Let's play with this and see what it feels, it looks like. And the more you play, the more comfortable you get with the tool, and the more you see the potential for what it can do in your classroom. At the same time, you can see where the answers may be wrong. You can see the answers not giving you what you're looking for. It's a great place to start. Play and ask questions. And I know I saw a survey out of EdWeek recently that showed that most educators are not getting the professional learning they need around AI. Do that. I was talking to a team earlier in Ohio. In Ohio, is a full education service district in Montgomery County in Ohio. We're doing a lot of work with the IEDU professional learning. These things are happening. Find your way in them, but more importantly, if you're a classroom teacher, play with this stuff.
Okay, so play is like my thing for sure. So I am all in on that. Yes, play. We love play. And I think that's excellent advice. So, and we actually just got another question that came in from the audience. And this one's from a student. So this is also exciting. As a grad student and former ESOL teacher, considering next steps in education and learning design, what do you see as necessary skills or most needed roles in this liaison space between school communities and ed tech AI vendors?
That's a big one. So let
Yeah.
me just say I am a former English learner. Maybe I still am. So that question is near and dear to me. But I would argue I'm not an expert in the teaching for multilingual learners. But the project that I mentioned around the science of reading and artificial intelligence is doubling down on two different groups: multilingual learners and, frankly, early learners. So we have a website on it. Please keep visiting and take a look. And we have folks here who are experts in this who can really help you understand what that is. But it goes back to the potential of the tool to really serve and support different kinds of learners. And this is where we need to push on the technology and the folks who are developing it for that kind of, again, golden triangle on conversation understanding of what this means for different and specific populations. So I would argue it's called the UGAIN Center, UGAIN, a digital promise. Visit that. There's a lot, or beginning to be a lot of information around what this will mean um, um, for multilingual learners.
Fantastic. And I just wrote that as a note to our team if we can find that link before we wrap up. So, as we are wrapping up, our last questions that we have actually are related to advice that you would give. And this one's going to be a long one. So I know you're going to talk for a little bit. We've already talked about all the different hats that you've worn, take a little journey on the Magic School Bus, and really want to know your perspective and advice for different audiences. So we just talked to a grad student, but want to talk about those who are maybe just getting started. We have a lot. We've been in the conversation for a while. We've been exploring policy and talking about all these things, but I'm going to start off with a teacher. What is your advice to a teacher who is just getting started with AI?
So I would say two things. One is my whole push on play with it. Play with Gemini, play with ChatGPT. In some cases, they have low cost or free version. If you can't find the free version, demand of your school principal to help you find the resources to do this. That's their job, to support you doing that. And frankly, don't let your imagination be limited. Push it. Think about, where am I struggling both in the administrative? Where am I struggling in really reaching every single learner in my classroom? And what is the potential for AI to actually solve that? Ask those questions, because we have to drive the tool development. And ultimately, you are the person that folks have to respond to support the learners in front of you. So I would say play and ask the questions. If you can find the resources, attend these kinds of conferences like we have in Anaheim, California, that is really geared to our teachers, and come and hang out and play with these tools.
Absolutely. Next up, principal hat.
Yeah. So again, as a principal, it goes back to what I said earlier, Kelly. Your job is to be principal teacher. One, make sure you're playing as well too, so you're knowledgeable, not necessarily about the latest version of Gemini, but what is this thing? What is, again? I keep going back to technology because it is emerging tech. Not in AI, by the way, has been in education since 1975, so it's not new. Gen AI is different. And don't think of Gen AI as generative text. There's images, there's video. I'm watching what is happening right now in the technology. What's coming out is exciting, really exciting. Not yet geared toward education. If I may digress for a second, I was at a conference recently in San Jose, California, where these two gentlemen were designing, were helping us understand the language of sea animals using AI, how whales
Wow.
talk to each other, how dolphins talk to each other. And again, it doesn't center the human, it centers the animal. It's called the Tech Interactives, which is what they had their conference. But anyhow, so the potential here is almost limitless. And again, it's only hindered by our imagination. But as a principle, think about who's your population, what are their needs, and what tools can really support that. Vet those tech tools carefully. If your district doesn't have a coherent structure, policy, etc., around that, push the question to your chief academic officer. I can tell you, even in Chicago, where I had more than 400 principals, they changed policy. If I got 50 emails from 50 principals, we all stopped and begin to ask questions. What are we not doing? What do we need to do? So it's important as a principal, collaborate with each other and push that discussion, especially if you don't have the tools to support the teachers who are supporting the learners, both in terms of the policy environment and construct, and more importantly, the practice end of this is really, really, really critical.
Great advice. So moving to the next sort of, you kind of started to touch on it a little bit. Let's go into the district leader hat now and talk about that. What is your advice for them?
Yeah, I mean, as a superintendent, your job is to create coherence. I've always believed that. And let me qualify that. When in my first district, the first thing I tackled, believe it or not, was transportation. We were shedding money in transportation. We had to bring a level of efficiency. Food services was a mess. And I often say to my principals, or to people, if your principals can feel transportation, if they can feel food services, it ain't working. That should be transparent to the core work of what they need to do. At the same time, you think about what you could save in terms of dollars and efficiency. And by the way, how we fixed that in Rochester was to bring on a lean Six Sigma black belt who worked with RIT in fixing and put $50 million back into the system. So coherence is not just, again, the instructional coherence, it is the operational coherence that supports the instructional program. You think about as a system leader, go back to the population in your district, think about the people in front of them, and think about the principals or principal teacher, and say to yourself, how do I develop that kind of strategic agility where I understand what I'm doing at my micro level and how that impacts the math teacher in the fourth grade? You walk around with Susan Lacey in Talladega County, Alabama. Susan knows, or the way she thinks about this idea of system integration is, what does that look like Monday morning, 9 a.m. math class in fourth grade, right? That level of through line is how she thinks about whatever I develop here needs to make sense to that teacher in the classroom, 9 a.m. Monday morning, fourth grade math class. So that's the work of a system to bring on the central office to rally in a coherent way to support a coherent instructional program supported by the operational parts of a system. You think about large system, again, Chicago was a Fortune 1000 organization. So the product is teaching and learning and student outcome, but the work of supporting that was really, really critical. So the last thing I'll say very quickly, Kelly, is the superintendent's job is to put on the state construct to make sure the state is supporting the LEAs and doing the work they need to do rather well. They can signal a ton on EdTech efficacy and EdTech ethics and EdTech XYZ to support what is happening at the LEA level. And they've got the purchasing power at the state level to really drive decisions of EdTech products and companies.
Yeah, for sure. Our last question, last but not least, and there's a couple of different ways you can go with this. I know I've chatted with you before about this, about different types of organizational leaders. We have entrepreneurial organizations, ed tech organizations, nonprofit organizations. You have expertise in all of those areas. So answer this for all three or however you would like. What is your advice to organizational leaders?
It goes back to this idea of supporting the folks who are doing the work. I still argue that the most important job I've ever had was being a school principal. Yes, teachers are critical and important, but as a principal, they are in many ways the pivot points in systems. So as a large global nonprofit here, Digital Promise, that is the lens I bring to every conversation. What are we doing here, and how is it supporting the people who are leading a group of teachers to change the outcomes for a lot of kids? That is critical and important. I often think about how do we define success, because math and reading proficiency is not the North Star. They are a means to an end. In too many places, that is the North Star. You think about this idea of economic outcomes, of well-being, of personal agency, which is again part of our goals here, Digital Promise. How is it as a nonprofit I'm collaborating with other nonprofits and frankly funding organizations, including government, to really support, as our colleague Josh Weisgrar often says, how do we design and develop and demonstrate to the world what is possible, and then work with the for-profit infrastructure to scale. I think that's the way in which I think about this, which is why this coalition with ISTE and COSIN and CAS and CEDA, they are part of our milieu in our conversation. How do we bend together? None of us can eat the elephant whole, but together, frankly, we can change a lot for a lot of kids if we align in the ways in which we actually do this kind of work.
Very well said. Very well said. Well, that brings us to our conclusion. I don't think we have any other questions from our audience, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to our thank yous. Thank you so much, Jean-Claude, for being
Thank
here
you.
with us, wherever you are. If it's afternoon, late afternoon, evening, it's evening here on the East Coast. Jean-Claude is joining us from the West Coast, I believe. That's where you are right now, right? Move around a lot, so. But please check out our panelist. You can find him on LinkedIn. You can find him on X. Our team should be dropping that information into the chat. Also, would love for you to join our conversation, join our AI education exchange here on LinkedIn. This is where you will find our upcoming Ask Me Anythings. Our next one will be on February 11th. It will be an asynchronous Ask Me Anything. We'll be joined by Megan Pattenhouse, also from Digital Promise, and bring your questions related to AI literacy support. That's going to be a good one. So, yeah. Anything else, Jean-Claude, that you want to say to everyone?
No, thank you so much for joining, and Kelly, thank you so much for moderating. You are amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful night, everyone.